Knock, knock, you guys. It's Mrs. Klein.
Newsflash, it's time for a podcast. It's Mrs. Wolbrin.
Right on, you guys. We're going to move into lesson 12, which is entitled Foreign Affairs in the Young Nation. Last lesson was all about kind of domestic issues that we had to take care of. And now we're going to branch out and see how our first four presidents have to deal with issues with foreign nations.
Yeah. Now, our guiding question in lesson 12 is, to what extent should the United States have become involved in world affairs in the early 1800s? And you have some important vocabulary to listen for and study as well. Blockade, embargo, isolationism, Monroe Doctrine, and neutrality. Okay. Did you know you are carrying a history lesson in your pocket or wallet? You will find it on any $1 bill. Look at the dollar and see for yourself. I think this is so cool.
Yeah. Oh, right? Absolutely. It makes me want to pull. I have $1 in my pocket right now. Or maybe I have a $5 bill. Okay. All right. On one side of the dollar, you're going to see two circles showing the Great Seal of the United States. For thousands of years, governments have used seals like this one to mark their approval of important documents. Our nation's founders thought that a national seal was so important that they began work on it the same day they declared independence. So they were feeling pretty good, pretty confident, right? Okay, on July 4th, 1776. In 1782, Congress approved the design we see on our currency today.
I had no idea that it was approved that long ago. Okay, the Great Seal symbolizes the nation's principles. For example, the unfinished pyramid on one side of the seal signifies strength and endurance, while the bald eagle on the other side is a symbol of the United States. In one claw, the eagle holds an olive branch, a symbol of peace. And in the other, the eagle holds arrows to symbolize war. The olive branch and arrows of war show that the United States will pursue peace, but will also protect itself. Notice that the eagle faces peace.
Okay, so we're looking to have peaceful resolutions to things. Mm-hmm. All right, then when you turn the dollar bill over, you will see a portrait of George Washington. Americans still honor Washington as the nation's first president, but few remember that Washington defined U.S. foreign policy in the early years of our nation's history.
During his presidency, Washington established policies that would guide the United States in its future dealings with other nations. The United States could be actively involved in world affairs and risk war, or it could avoid involvement in other nations' conflicts in the hope of staying at peace. Which choice would you have made for the new nation? In this lesson, we're going to be learning about the 4 dilemmas that faced early U.S. presidents and how their decisions shaped the foreign policy pursued by later presidents.
Okay. All right, you guys. So George Washington, obviously, we know he's our first president, and he creates a foreign policy for what he hopes all the other presidents are going to follow. So when George Washington took office as the nation's first president in 1789, the United States was weak militarily. The army that Washington had commanded during the American Revolution had disbanded and had not been replaced for 2 reasons. First, the government did not have the money to keep its army active. Second, some Americans feared that a standing national army could be used to take away their liberty. State militia troops, they believed, could handle any threats the country might face.
Yes, and there were indeed threats, because the new nation was surrounded by unfriendly powers. Events in Europe also threatened the new nation. France declared war against Great Britain, presenting President Washington with the difficult problem of deciding which side to take. And this is kind of a review from our last lesson, because we really talked a lot about this. Knowing that the United States was not prepared for war, Washington decided to ignore the treaty with France and announced a policy of neutrality. Washington's policy of avoiding alliances with other countries became known as isolationism.
Okay, all right. Moving on. So now Washington is served for 2 terms, right? He leaves, and then we have John Adams, who takes over as the second president. All right, so this next section is President Adams' dilemma, protecting U.S. ships. Okay, isolationism sounded good in theory, but it's often hard to stay out of other countries' conflicts. No one knew this better than the nation's second president, John Adams, who tried to follow George Washington's policy of neutrality. With France, however, staying neutral proved to be difficult.
Yes, and we're going to talk about the Jay Treaty. After the outbreak of war between Great Britain and France in 1793, The British Navy began to attack U.S. merchant ships headed for France. Now, last lesson, we really focused on France attacking our ships.
Exactly.
So this is some new info, and I don't think you heard that wrong.
Yeah.
This is also happening. Okay. French leaders hoped that these attacks, as well as Great Britain's refusal to leave the Ohio Valley, would lead to war between Great Britain and the United States. However, those hopes were dashed when Washington sent John Jay, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, to London to settle things with the British. In the treaty signed in 1794, known as the Jay Treaty, the British finally agreed to pull their troops from the Ohio Valley and halt attacks on U.S. shipping. France, still at war with Great Britain, viewed the Jay Treaty as an alliance between the United States and Great Britain. In July 1796, the French Navy began attacking U.S. merchant ships bound for Great Britain. This is what we talked about. Yes. And over the next year, French warships seized several American ships. I think it was 300.
Yeah, it was more than 300. Okay. All right. And I know here, you guys, this is a bit of a review here because we've already talked about the XYZ affair, but this is what necessitated, all right, us sending diplomats to France. So we got the XYZ affair. So we got the British attacking us, and then the French start doing the same thing. All right. President Adams sent 3 envoys or representatives to France to ask the French to end the attacks. French Foreign Minister Talleyrand refused to speak to the Americans. Instead, they were met by secret agents, later identified only as X, Y, and Z. The agents said that no peace talks would be held unless Talleyrand received a large sum of money or a tribute, or money given to somebody in exchange for that person's protection. The XYZ affair, as it became known, outraged Americans when the story reached home. Congress voted to recruit an army and to build new ships for the nation's tiny navy. The slogan, "Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute," was heard everywhere as Americans prepared for war. Meanwhile, Congress authorized U.S. warships and privately owned ships called privateers to launch a half war on the seas. During this undeclared war, American ships captured more than 80 French vessels.
Yeah. Okay, the next section that we're going to talk about is what happened. John Adams is pursuing peace. So what happened? And this we talked about too.
We did, because there are people who wanted to outright declare war.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's go. Absolutely, yes.
Okay, in a treaty made between France and the United States in 1800, and it was called the Convention of 1800,
Yep.
Napoleon agreed to end France's 1778 alliance with the United States. In exchange, the Americans agreed not to ask France to pay for all of the ships it had seized. Choosing the olive branch cost Adams political popularity. Jefferson defeated Adams in the election of 1800, and the Federalist Party lost much of its support.
They did. Okay, all right. So that ends
our first podcast.
All right.
And gotta go.
All right, you guys. See ya.